Three, two, one. Hey guys, welcome back to the Hukt podcast. I'm your host Kushaj. These are your other hosts, Umar, Hiren, and Tanay. And in today's episode, we've got a dashing topic lined up for you, all about poverty. So Umar, you as the future poverty member of this podcast, do you want to talk more about poverty?
Mate, yeah, man, you're the one with the mustache looking like a pedophile.
Now, Umar, do you want to get us started all about poverty?
Yes, I do. Okay, so poverty, according to Britannica.com, is a state of one who lacks a usual or socially acceptable amount of money or material possessions. You know, obviously, we know some African countries, some South American countries are most stricken by poverty. So today, do you want to give us some facts and statistics based on these topics?
Sure, Umar. So, as of the latest statistics, which comes from 2020, I think we're going to take those as statistics because those seem to be the most honest or valuable ones at this time. But South Sudan has a poverty rate of 82%. And right below them are a range of other African and South American countries. Now, some people might attribute that high poverty rate to COVID-19 COVID-19. But in countries which are within Africa, there's many external factors such as war, genocide, famine, and also land availability, which ends up increasing the poverty rates in these countries. So that's a trend which we've been seeing till now. What do you guys think about that?
All of that fun stuff, with genocide, add that to my bucket list one day. But, poverty, it seems to be very, close into the African region in particular, right? Like, as you mentioned, it's about they're struggling through a lot of wars, but it's also about how COVID-19 affects, like, less developed economies, right? So you have your developed countries, you have the United States, which is still doing terribly in my opinion, but, let's take the United States. Right, they have a developed country. They're a developed country, right? They have the funding, they have banks, they have all these resources that they can sort of help to, mitigate the problem of poverty. The problem is, all these poor countries don't have these institutions. So it's like, it's not really fair, is it? If you try to compare the U.S. to like another sort of third world country. What do you guys think?
Yeah, exactly. I think these countries, is what their economies are based around. Obviously, America's really about the tertiary sector, about services, goods being provided. But these third world countries are more about manufacturing. But you even get big manufacturing countries like India, China, those guys. But I think it's these countries that have less funding, more war, stuff like that really impacts them.
So
I think
go on.
Okay, I was gonna say the places like Africa, right? We've obviously seen like some of the news regarding how China's kind of came in, done some development there, and potentially might help to sort of develop the sort of economic standards of there. But in the same time, they might also help like the actual communities in Africa, and because like they've obviously been given the land and the respect to be there, and China might be able to sort of help, sort of overcome this sort of challenge. Not obviously by a lot, because obviously it's still a big problem in Africa. Like some places like in Kenya and stuff, famine is still a thing. But I think it's a step towards trusting and also sort of giving sort of first world countries the chance to sort of support places like Africa.
Speaking of their support for Africa, the WHO leader, I forgot his name, coincidentally, but China has invested a lot of money into his home country. And the WHO, since then, I'm just saying this might just be a huge coincidence after all, you never know, but they've sort of ceased the investigation of looking into the origins of coronavirus and the potential factor that it came from China. Now, I'm just saying that's just a huge coincidence, but all of that investment into Africa is a great thing, and I 10 out of 10 support it. So, yeah, what do you guys think?
Just a means, like, guys, we are not accusing the General Secretary of the United Nations as being corrupt.
Not at all.
not at all. Tanay, what are you
No.
gonna say?
I think Kushaj is just out of the blue, just this completely coincidental coincidence, aren't you, Shah?
Oh yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
man. I don't know. It just popped into my head for some reason.
Yeah, Kushal is just making his predictions. But I think one thing which we've observed around the world is that, I mean, this is a phrase which has been overused, but I think it's quite true that the rich are getting richer and the poor are quite frankly getting poorer, because you've got those top billionaires every day around the world. We see those news headlines. I don't know, Jeff Bezos becomes the richest man, then Elon Musk overtakes him, and it keeps on going on. But then we also see that every year the percentage of people in poverty increase. I think the thing which, I mean, shout out to those people who take econ, because we're doing this right now in macro, but I think income inequalities is the main contributor to this, because you've got the rich people who are getting even richer and the poor people getting even poorer, creating that big difference between them, and that seems to just be increasing year by year, and that's one of the big problems which we have today.
Yeah, definitely. I think you see in some countries you get the isolation of the middle class. You either get the ones who are really rich, or you get the people in poverty, and I think that's a real issue. I mean, you don't really get it much in Hong Kong, but there's definitely a major disparity between the middle class and those in poverty. I think you see it most predominantly in Hong Kong. Hiren, what are you going to say?
I was going to agree with that. I think that's true. I think Hong Kong's actually one of the biggest for having this sort of gap. And I think, again, today that's something we learned in econ, that how Hong Kong's one of the biggest, even though it's so economically developed, yet still such a big problem. But obviously, it's still a problem in places like India. India has something just like that. The sort of gap between the poor and the rich is just ever expanding more and more, especially in the times of the pandemic. What do y'all think?
I feel like, yeah, it's getting bigger, right? You have that gap, right? But the problem is, how do you even tackle that gap? Because from the way I see it, right, there's actually one main solution that everyone has, or actually two solutions, all right? The first one is what most people think, and they think that you should increase the taxes on the rich, right? And then you should just spend that money across, But if you look in the United States, right, you see the wealthiest 1% paying like the largest majority in taxes to the government. And what's another thing that you got to consider is all these people, most of them are working super hard to get to where they are. Elon Musk didn't just wake up. Okay, well, he did come from a privileged background, but he didn't wake up one day and decide I'm gonna found SpaceX, and he just sort of wished, and then he just got to being the richest man on earth. It's not how it works. You got to actually put in the work, put in the hours to actually get there, and exactly, it's you can't just take it away from them because they actually just work to get there.
Yeah, but I mean that's the point. Wait, sorry, continue.
Yeah, and then there's the other solution, which I'm seeing some people who are further on the left, and they're suggesting that we should just completely seize some of their assets, and it's and not just seizing their assets, but it's also sort of removing their power in a sense, and giving more of that to the employees, getting more of those wage benefits and all of that. But at the end of the day, they're the ones who are taking the most risk, they're putting in the most money, they're working the most. So it's I feel like I'm not really sure what the solution is in this case, but you can't just say tax them more, because that's not sort of a fair solution.
Yeah, I think the second point you said, I think that's completely stupid, because that just goes against what capitalism is all about, right? These people work hard for their money, and they deserve their money. Well, most of them at least deserve their money. But I mean, going back to what you were saying earlier about how these people work, Elon Musk, we said, he came from a privileged background. How does education play a role into this? Because these people who have high levels of education are obviously more likely going to become richer economically. But those with low education, they're going back into poverty just like their parents and their parents. So, yeah. What are you guys saying?
So I think you raise a great point there, Umar, because sometimes, I mean, some people will attribute success to working really hard, but then sometimes you've also got to realize the educational background which you come from, because I mean we all go to KGV, right? I'd say that's a fairly well off school, but at the same time we might have a more accelerated pathway, I guess, moving ahead, but then not everyone has that. And the reason why we're able to be put in this educational pathway is because we've got the support which lets us reach there. So it kind of makes me question that, like, those who don't have enough household income, if they can't get their children to a school or to an educational institute which would propel them as far as they want them to go, then is there kind of like a cycle which is being created where, it's like you can't really move past that, right? Because if you don't have enough income to send your children to a great enough school, then like that cycle just keeps on continuing on and on. So yeah, that's what I think. Kushaj?
I definitely agree with what you're saying, right? A lack of, formal education definitely makes it harder. But I feel like formal education really only applies if you're going for sort of like an employed job, like where you're working for someone else. That's when like formal education is really important, right? I'm not going to show up to be a brain surgeon with no degree from medical school. And the same way some guy from Africa is also with no education is also not going to do that. Now, on that regard, I feel like if you want to be a successful businessman, though, if you understand your market well enough and you can and you're willing to put in the real effort and you're willing to think outside the box, solve problems that no one else has solved, learn skills no one else can really master. In that way, it's definitely harder, but it's still possible to do it. And we see so many success stories all the time of these people who work day and night to, get better. It was like Mr. Beast. He sort of came from nothing, or he didn't come from nothing, but like he came from a middle class family. I mean, it's not exactly poor, but for most middle class people, your goal is just to get a job, like a normal job, and sort of end up working that for the rest of your life. So it's like he decided, I want to go YouTube, and he put in crazy amounts of hours. I think like something I saw, it was like putting in like 12, 14 hours a day on his channel when he was like still growing it. So, and he has that like sort of motivation to constantly sort of self-improve. So I think that sort of motivation is what you really need if you want to get out of poverty.
Yeah, and I think just to add on from that, I think that it's obviously the hard work that gets you to places, and it's also the sort of path that you take and the work that you put. The sort of like there's always going to have to be some sort of connection there. But Mr. Beast is somebody who wasn't really interested in education. Mr. Beast worked really hard because he had a true passion for just creating videos. He was obsessed with YouTube, but he didn't like school. His mom forced him to go to community college. He failed high school in like his first or second term because he didn't even get past like 50% of the attendance because he hated school. So I don't think that education completely has to do with that. And because of Mr. Beast, we see somebody who's already taking over YouTube. What is he on, like 80, 90 million YouTube followers, and God knows how much money he makes now. But it's just like that. I don't completely agree that education takes you all the way. Of course, it supports you. Of course, it's part of the system. But people can become way more successful from that, and we've seen that in various examples, from film stars to people even working from farms. I just think that it depends on what sort of like work you put in, the sort of path that you take. And I think the success story varies, but sometimes I think that people just don't want to leave where they come from. Like obviously, yeah, people in poverty, right? They like their next 2 or 3 generations will still be in that position, or of course they might make some progress with their hard work. But still, the thing is, right, some of them want to be there. Some of them still, they really care about their heritage and where they came from. They just want to keep developing that, and they don't want to go straight up to the tops where more money, more problems. What do you guys think?
Hiren, I'm going to be honest here. I'm yet to meet a person who says, I want to stay broke forever. Because like most people, right, in our society, we see it as one thing, right? The more wealthy you are, the more successful you are. And at the end of the day, everybody wants to be a success, right? It's sort of how biology leads you. You want to be a success, you want to survive, yada yada. So in our society, you're not surviving without money. Now, the more money you have, sort of the better off you are. But I feel like what would be a potential way, I guess it's not really implementable, right? But it's sort of, you gotta drive your own ethical consciousness. Like all of our rich billionaires, yeah, they're putting in money into, I think they donate to charity, they donate millions, right? But I feel like as a billionaire, you should be doing everything you can to sort of help out the same people who basically made you what you are, rich in the end. Because, cash is king. Cash comes from consumers. What do you guys think?
Yeah, but is it really the billionaires' job or responsibility, or is it more the government? Should they be the ones subsidizing the poor because of the position they're in? But because I can't really see billionaires doing that unless it's their employees, right? Because, as you said, cash is king. What do you think, Kushaj?
Well, the government is like, they're meant to be the main guys who are taking care of everyone, right? But, like, the government is heavily influenced by billionaires. Okay, like, for example, I'm picking on the United States a lot here. But if you look at the United States, right, you have lobbyists everywhere, particularly from the fossil fuel industry, right? Now, what they do is they sort of get first name basis with, like, all the senators, all the important people who decide laws, right? And, they just buy them a couple cheeky drinks, they take them to that fancy 5-star restaurant, and it's like, hey, so about that fossil fuel bill, the one that's going to tax and make our company lose millions of dollars, it'd be a real shame if you passed that through. And that's the sort of lobbying is what really hinders government progress in a sense. And obviously this is off billionaires, or not billionaires, but definitely very wealthy people, because you need money to have that kind of power and influence politicians.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I get what you mean here, and I would like to say that if you're telling me that like money is obviously one of the solutions, then what about places like America, where people who come from poverty, something we learned that one factor of like poverty is like crime rates. Crime rates increase because people obviously think that they can't make it, or they start getting depressed, or like they start having different sort of like mindset. They think that crime is the solution. But how come we still see that in America, when people get more money, crime rates are still high? Why is that a problem?
So with that, I think that's just adding back to the whole thing at the start, right, about income inequalities. Because with that, while we might see at the face value, like, real GDP is rising, the country's getting richer, at the same time, you've got to realize that GDP is also largely compromised from the top billionaires of the country who are getting bigger. But at the same time, the poorer people are actually getting poorer because more of the income is taken up by the richer people. So I feel like countries which are on the global stage better off as far as incomes go, as far as billionaires go. They've at the same time got an equally high amount of people in poverty. Like as Hiren brought up earlier, like the example of India, there's actually a larger number of growing billionaires there now, but at the same time, I can't even begin to count how many people are in poverty over there. So I think that's just one of the key things which we observe. Yeah.
So
it's kind of like...
what were you going to say?
No, you go, man. You go. I want to hear the speech that you're about to give.
Now, I was going to move on to India's monetary fund thing. Is there something you want to say before that?
No, it's gone.
Alright, okay. Well then, let's move on straight to India's monetary fund, the IMF. So food transfer strategies in India are preventing extreme poverty from rising. And this is good because India has seen only a 1%, less than 1% in the extreme poverty section of India since. So according to the IMF, and food transfers were extreme poverty was showing that reminded that the low level of dependency as low as 0.8. The IMF further noted that it remained at the low level of extreme poverty was critical in preventing an increase in extreme poverty.
Wow.
You got me crying up there, man.
That was great, man.
Emotional.
Oh my god.
Wow.
You should go to a soap opera.
Right. No, anyways,
wow.
The
scheme played a major role in lowering.
Did you take the hint there? Look, alright. Hey, I'm gonna be honest here. When the future poor person of this podcast who takes HLAI, Mr. Tanay Lakhani, when he dipped, alright, that's when it's not going so hot. But anyways, you mentioned a lot of really long names and all these really long government programs. So could you go a little bit more into detail about like any one of them?
But I can't lie, I kind of zoned out like after half of it, man. It was just words after that.
Okay, guys, I'm sorry.
Summarize it.
Alright, okay. I'll summarize it for you guys. Okay.
Thank you.
The scheme is basically a free food games thing for migrants or for the people of the poor. And since 2019, India has kept extreme poverty controlled under 1%. Okay? And what we're saying here is the food subsidy inequality at what was that 0.294, which was almost under control with since like what 10-20 years since 1993 1994. And what I've said here is extreme poverty is less than the $1.9 per day thing, and that's it.
Right.
Amazing, man. Amazing.
Bravo, man.
What was so
That was-
confusing about that? Was it the scheme?
It was
No,
a
that
scheme.
was-
It was a scheme.
Yeah, it's a
yeah,
scheme,
yeah,
man.
yeah.
It was a scheme.
Shireen, what do you think about poor people in India?
I mean, why don't you tell me? I've just explained my point, brother.
So
I've got a few on
I-
that, Jack. If you don't have anything.
no, trust me. I was paying attention to Crane's whole detailed 10-minute
Oh,
evaluation.
please
of
go
the
on. I
IMF.
want to hear this.
Yeah, let's hear it then. Go on. Talk about the IMF.
Right. So the India monetary.
Internet?
Wait. I'm at India.
No.
No, gentlemen,
Sorry, what?
please show some respect. Put some respect on my name. Okay. The India Monetary Fund was a program set up by the Indians.
Was it?
Oh,
Wow.
I think so. I reckon so. I mean,
I thought
you
it
know,
was set up by
initially-
the Chinese.
Yeah.
Oh no, I thought it was the Turks at the start, man. But it
Oh.
turns out the Indians set it up. But
Okay.
right. So it's about helping poor people and migrants with money. You see what I did there? Because it's in the India Monetary Fund.
Yeah, so moving on,
Yeah.
guys. I think what we've observed in the case of, I mean, not just sorry to cut you off there, Shag. It's just we were you know waffles, right? And like we were beginning to enter
Yeah,
the
I'm a
waffle
huge
phase.
fan of waffles, man.
Yeah, I
like
love
from
waffles, you
Arby's.
know. Get some maple syrup on there, some fresh
Butter.
berries, strawberry, man, butter on there, man.
Too bad
Like-
poor people can't enjoy that. No shame.
Shaq likes his waffles with butter. butter. But I think we steered off a bit. But I think one more thing which I've learned is like the countries which have high poverty rates today, it kind of seems to be a trend which never really got much better from the past. I mean, like if you look at India, right? Let's just take it for example, like the post-partition years, like 1947 onwards. They had a high poverty rate then, and they still got one now. So I feel like it's not just something which just spurs out of nowhere. Yeah, with cases like the Wall Street crash or with COVID-19, it can increase, but it seems to be something which lasts for a long time, like from the start. So that's what we've observed with poverty rates. Kushal?
Well, I actually kind of disagree with that. Now, I feel like the reason that India's poverty rate is still so high is mainly because of population growth, right? India has like what, around 1 point something billion people in its populace. I forgot the exact figure. Yeah, they have a lot of people in their populace, right? Now, with most families in India having like an average of, I think it was around three children, you know, it's above what is in the developed world, right? So when you have a family that's already like struggling to support itself, right, and then you suddenly give birth to like sort of more kids, right? Well, it's, you know, you're kind of also going to struggle to support those children in the same sense. So I feel like it's not really sort of the government's fault in this sense, right? It's not like, oh, what are you meant to do about it in that sense? You know, people are just going to make more people. So I feel like the government should more focus. It gets harder with time, basically, because you have more
Yeah.
people to support. Although
Yeah.
you do get richer, but you definitely have more people to support.
I think that's the difference between countries like India, America, and the UK. Because you see the UK and America, they got facilities for even those in poverty. You see public schools, those are free. In the UK, healthcare is pretty much almost free. But in India, those facilities aren't as developed as they would be in more Western countries. I think that's the difference that separates the two.
Yeah, and like I think you brought up UK and America, but along with that, like one thing which surprised me is Germany. I mean, like they've got a GDP of 3 trillion or something, but I can't stop thinking about the fact that, I mean, you lose 2 world wars and then you still come out better than a country which has such a high population and such a high working class. I mean, like that I think that clearly shows that you've got to have the right facilities, the right help from the people around you to help like in boosting economic growth and also reduce poverty. But I think that's what one of the issues is in India. It's also the high population, as Kushaj said.
Yeah, I'm not really sure it's completely fair to compare Germany to India, because obviously Germany had the Marshall Act after World War II when they got funds from America, whereas India were left pretty much high and dry by the UK, except for trading. So I think there's quite a massive difference between the two. Jack?
Yeah, and Umar basically said almost everything I wanted to say. It's like the British, right? They extracted, I think the figures were like $45 trillion worth of today's money from India, during their occupation. So I feel like, if you compare Germany, like, they got their and they put it handed to them 2 times, right? In 2 world wars, right? They got crippled by that. But at the end of the day, they're in Europe. Europe has always been the sort of financial center of the world, right? So your recovery is going to be quicker if you are in Europe, particularly if you're like, 1800s, 1900s. We act like those sort of times don't really influence what happens today, but those times were very important, right? I mean, I know as an Indian, I don't particularly think about the British and, their occupation of India for those couple of years, but those definitely mattered, and those play a huge part in like sort of the poverty. It's basically, right, it's sort of an ethics game, right? So you can, during the colonization period, you can go to other countries, you take their money, you make their people worse off, but you end up making yourself better off. But obviously back then, stuff like human rights and equality didn't really exist, I'm not gonna lie. So I feel like that sort of mindset is what really made some countries really rich and others poor. And obviously capitalism, socialism, communism, yada yada. That's what also helped make that difference in poverty.
Yeah, and I think the reason I mentioned India and Germany is just so we can get this debate going on, because I started to think about this, right? And I started to realize that like a majority of the countries which have high poverty rates, they, at least at some point, they used to be an ex-colony of some kind of empire, some kind of other country in the old days. There's not any specific empire, there's a range of them which used to exist, primarily European ones, and they used to rule over these colonies. And after they got decolonized, we see a majority of them have high poverty rates today. So I think that's, I'm not going to say it's a coincidence, I think there's a direct correlation there that like countries which were ex-colonies of any empire, they seem to be left worse off after the colonizers leave the country. Yeah. So that might be the root of poverty in these countries.
I think I know what you're saying about colonizers. I think the main thing I know with the British is after they leave, civil war. It's always civil war almost straight after. You see Kenya, America, even South Africa, and India to an extent. I think that's what always gets left behind by colonizers, civil war, which always ruins the economy. So I think it's hard to pick up the pieces from there, and that already sets the foundations for what's to come in the future.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. And like just thinking about it, right? Like if India is able to, like India again, if India is able to like reduce and limit the amount of like their population in general, then like you'd obviously see like reduced fertility rates. You'd see reduction in unemployment. You'd see like a better overall like living standards, like things like that. Even maybe carbon emissions, bro. Like the environment. We'd see like India obviously seeing a big change in carbon emissions, and especially seeing like how there's like things like Tesla investing in India, and that becoming a trend, or something that to just invest in India for, so they can start bringing clean energy. That would start like pushing things forward for India, especially because India would start seeing a bigger change, and it might be more vital that it happens now. What do you guys think?
As you were saying, this clean, green technology, our world's definitely seeing a push towards that, right? You see everyone everywhere. It's always about wildfire here, drought here, extreme weather event, and how you just get blasted with data, right? Climate change is happening, and we even did an episode about it. But yeah, so it's sort of
check link on our channel to the climate change episode featuring Miss Semol Yuan.
Quick plug. But anyways, So what happens, right, is when you have this emphasis on green technology and you have all these developed economies that used fossil fuels and coal, right? They got away with that that sort of cheaper fuel to develop and sustain their economies. So I feel like that sort of they've sort of reduced their carbon emission, but they got to take advantage of those fossil fuels in their past. That helped them get to where they are. Now you look at all these developing countries, China and India, they're leading the world in pollution, right? But the thing is, they're still, I guess China's finished industrializing, but India's still industrializing. I mean, India still needs to run because a large part of the population is still in the agricultural industry, right? But what happens once that economy goes into the secondary sector, right? Where there's all manufacturing, you're gonna have a huge uptick in fossil fuel intake. And it's these green fuels, they're way more expensive than fossil fuels. I mean, they're getting cheaper, but they're still more expensive. So it's like that sort of poverty rate, and like the government's stuck in a position, do I help my own people using these cheaper fuels, which are bad for the environment, or do I go the green route and better in the long term? Politicians think politicians think short term because they have the next election cycle to care about, not long term. That sort of incentive is what drives it's sort of what drives that push into fossil fuels, the elections in their short term.
I think yeah, Kushaj, you're right, because I think climate change plays a direct role with economic growth and poverty, because if you want to push economic growth and reduce poverty, you've gotta disregard the climate to an extent. But I think we can go on about that all day. But quite frankly, we gotta end the episode now. So, any ending remarks, guys?
Stay safe. Wear your mask.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Jack?
And on that note, thank you guys so much for watching this podcast. I know there's a solid 0 people that are at this section right now. But if you are, thank you so much for watching this podcast and having absolutely no life. But anyways, we hope to see you there for the next episode, where we're going to be talking about, I don't know yet because we haven't planned that far. But anyways, stay tuned for that episode. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that like button, and hopefully see you next time.